Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are watching this video. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to look at cell structure and functions. So, okay, before we continue, we need to understand what cell is. A cell is a living cell rather is defined as the fundamental unit of life, and it is the smallest unit capable of exhibiting the characteristics of life. So cell is the smallest unit of life. It's the smallest entity that can carry out all the characteristics of living thing. So what are those characteristics of living thing? You know from your basic biology that movement, respiration, irritability, and so on and so forth. So a cell has that property to carry out all those characteristics of life. Cell was accidentally discovered in 1665 by Robert Hooke while he was examining a thin slice of cork under his microscope. You remember Robert Hooke? He actually was the one behind Hooke's law. You remember Hooke's law of elasticity. So he was actually the one that discovered cell. He observed numerous porous structures, which are dead cells made of cellulose that are found in plants, and he named them cells from the Latin word cellula, which means little room or small chamber. This is the picture of Robert Hooke, who lived between 1635 to 1703. Okay, now let's look at the structure. How does this animal cell look like? Let's look at the structure of the animal cell. So this is the typical structure of animal cell. This is a well-labeled diagram. You can see we are going to talk about the shapes in the subsequent slides. Shapes of different cells have different shapes, but this is a typical example of oval shape. It's not a round, it's not typically round, but looks more like oval shape. So if you look at it, there are various components. The cell is divided into three parts. There is this part that is called the cell membrane or plasma membrane, which is the outer covering that protects the cell. It's carried out so many functions. It prevents leakage of substances that are inside the cell. To prevent the leakage of these substances outside the cell. So it also prevents the movement of molecules from outside or from inside the cell to outside, or from outside the cell to inside the cell. So it has to be things that enter or goes out of the cell, they have to be regulated. So the function of this plasma membrane, it prevents unwanted movement of these molecules from either outside the cell or inside the cell. So the inside of the cell is called the intracellular environment, while the outside of the cell is called the extracellular environment. So there is fluid outside the cell, which is called extracellular fluid, and there is also fluid inside the cell, which is called intracellular fluid. So this plasma membrane kind of separates the extracellular component and the intracellular component of the cell. So that is the function of plasma membrane, or you call it cell membrane. So another part of the cell is the cytoplasm, which is the cell environment. It houses so many organelles inside. As you can see, it has mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, lysosome, Golgi bodies, Golgi vehicles. You can see them. You can see centrioles. You can see endoplasmic reticulum, both smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. You can see the ribosome, and this is the cytoplasm, and you can see the microtubules. All of these organelles, they have their function. They have what? Their function. So the other third part of the cell, which is the nucleus, look at it. It also has its own membrane, which is called the nuclear membrane, which is prevent the movement. It shields the extracellular, the cytoplasmic components. It shields itself from it. It has cellular, what do you call, nuclear membrane, and it also have what we call the nucleus, and this is what we call the nucleus, where generally it houses the genetic materials, which is the DNA or the RNA, as the case may be. So all these organelles, they have their different function, which we are going to see in later as classes. So animal cell, let's look at now shape and sizes of this animal cell. Animal cells have different shapes and sizes. Some are circular, some are spherical, some are cylindrical, while others are fibrous, etc. So if you look at these shapes that are here under these cell shapes, you can have animal cell that is round. You can have another one that is oval. You can have another one that is columnar. Some animal cells are called have the shape of fusiform or spindle. Some are cuboidal. Some are polygonal. Some have star-shaped. Some have pear-shaped. So all these shapes, there are different examples of cells that have these different shapes. For instance, if you look at this picture that is here, the one that is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1 is stem cells. So if you look at it, if you compare with the shapes, which of this shape do you think can be the shape of stem cells? They look more like round shape, right? So if you look at red blood cells, erythrocytes, they look like oval, right? They have oval shape. And if you look at these muscle cells, they have what we call the fusiform or the spindle, right? Look at it, spindle, they assume that shape. If you look at this number 4, which is intestinal cells, they look more like what we call this columnar, right? They look like columnar shape. So if you look at the picture that is below that, you can see this is smooth muscle. You remember smooth muscle cell? Look at it. This is muscle cells, and look at the shape, which is fusiform or spindle, right? You have blood cells, different shapes, different types. Look at them, but largely it's oval, right? And you have the nerve cell, which is one of the longest one of the longest cell that you can have. And you can have this bone cell, which looks like this star shape. And you have fat cell, you have sperm, you have the ovum. In terms of size, you can see they have different sizes and shapes. In terms of size, ovum is one of the largest cells that you can have in animals. And while the red blood cells are one of the smallest cells you can find in animals. So let's look at different parts of the cell. We have the plasma membrane, which is the outer covering that protects the cell, prevents leakage or movement of molecules inside or outside of the cell. It has to be regulated. So when you zoom it fully, this is the outer covering in blue. Look at it. When you zoom it fully, this is the architectural or structural representation of this plasma membrane. It has so many molecules in it. it has glycoproteins, which are proteins that have carbohydrates attached to them. It has protein, it has carbohydrate, it has lipids. Okay, so this is glycoprotein, which is protein that has what carbohydrate moiety. You have the carbohydrate, which is this. This is the upper part, the carbohydrate. You have glycolipid, lipids that have carbohydrate attached to them. You have cholesterol, you have globular proteins, and you can have different types of protein in the cell membrane. You have what we call the two types of proteins that you can find in terms of how deeply they are embedded in the membrane. You can have peripheral protein and you can have integral proteins. Peripheral protein are within the periphery of the cell membrane, while integral protein, they are deep inside the membrane. Some of them can span from one side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane. And in terms of functions, you can have these channel proteins, you can have enzymatic proteins. These channel proteins, they allow transport of molecules inside and outside of the cell. So when we come to look at cell membrane in details, you will see different functions of these different components of this plasma membrane, all the glycoproteins and the proteins and lipids that are found in the cell membrane. We can see their function. So the second part of the cell is the cytoplasm, which I initially introduced to you. This is the cytoplasm, which has the organelles inside. It houses the organelles, which is the cell environment. It have the organelles. You can have the mitochondria, the lysosome, the centrioles, and so on and so forth. So the third part of the cell is the nucleus, which is this. It has nuclear membrane, it has the nucleolus, and also it houses what it is the repository of what genetic material. It houses the genetic material. So let's look at now the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, or in terms of their cell, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. What are their differences? First, we need to understand what these prokaryotes are. Prokaryotes are organisms that do not have, they are single cell organisms and that they do not have true or membrane bound nucleus. Okay, they are unicellular in terms of composition of their cell. They are usually single cell animal, single cell organisms. While eukaryotes are organisms that are multicellular. They have many cells in them, and they have what? They have true nucleus and they have membrane bound nucleus. So when you look at the kingdoms of different organisms, kingdom classification, the 5 kingdom classification, you can see that the fungi, the plants and animals, they all fall under eukaryotes, while bacteria and blue-green algae, they fall under prokaryotes. So what are the differences and what do they share in common? If you look at this Venn diagram, you can see that prokaryotes, they don't have membrane-bound organelles. They have no membrane-bound organelles. So their organelles, they do not have membrane bound to them. So while for the eukaryotic cells, they contain membrane-bound organelles. For instance, you can see it has the nucleus, it has nuclear membrane, right? Remember, the mitochondria also it has membrane. All these organelles, they have what? Membrane. So they are contain membrane-bound organelles, while for prokaryotes, they do not have. So there is no true nucleus in prokaryotes, while eukaryotes, they contain true nucleus. You can see the genetic material is being housed inside the nucleus, while for the prokaryotes, the genetic materials just float inside the cytoplasm. It was not contained within a nucleus or membrane-bound nucleus. So they are usually unicellular. They are unicellular organisms, and while for the eukaryotes, they can be uni or multicellular, as the case may be. And in terms of sizes, the prokaryotes, they have about 0.1 to 5 micrometer, while for the eukaryotes, they have a diameter of 10 to 100 micrometer. They undergo asexual and sexual reproduction, so they can reproduce both sexually and asexually, while for prokaryotes, they can only undergo asexual reproduction, and they have cell wall instead of what they have what cell wall in them. And what do they have in common? They have ribosomes, they have cell membrane, right? The outer covering, which is cell membrane. Then they have DNA, and they have what the cytoplasm, which is the cell environment. So what are the types, classification, and lifespan of animal cells? There are about 210 distinct human cell types, and there are between 10 and 100 trillion cells in an adult human. So you can see the large number of cells that are present in adult human. So animals, they grow as a result of cell division and cell enlargement. All animals begin their existence as a simple cell, i.e., from a fertilized egg. Remember fertilization, when you have a sperm cell from a male donor and you have an ova from a female donor after copulation, and the sperm will navigate its way and penetrate the egg, right? So when that happens, the sperm is able to form zygote after being fused inside the animal, inside the ova. We can say we have what fertilization. So after that, you can have cell division, which is going to be 2, and you have 2 divided into 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16, 32, etc., which produce a body consisting of numerous cells. So what is the largest cell in animal? Ovum is the largest cell in man, while red blood cell is the smallest, as I earlier introduced to you. So multicellular organisms have a group of specialized cells. This group of specialized cells, they are called tissues, and they perform a specific function. So you can have, in multicellular organisms, you can have cell, remember, you can have cell, a group of these cells that specializes to perform a particular function. Now, if they do that, you can have that as what? Tissue, which they perform a specific function. So you can have different examples of tissues. You can have epithelial tissues, nervous tissues, muscle tissues, and you can have connective tissues. Cells within our body have different lifespan based on the type and function of that cell. Although some types of animals are short-lived, others remain in our body for months, years, or even throughout our life. For example, taste receptors, cells that are found in our tongue, they live for 10 days. They live for 10 days. 1 month for the skin cell, 15 years for muscle cells, and all you can have a lifetime for nerve cells. So if you look at these examples, you have taste receptor cells that are found inside our mouth, right? Remember taste buds that are found in our tongues, right? They live for 10 days. And you can have skin cells that can live for a month. And you can have muscle cells that that can live for up to 15 years, and you can have a lifetime lifespan for nerve cells. So a normal red blood cell lives for about 3 to 4 months, while a sickle-shaped red blood cell lives for only 10 to 20 days. So what do you think here? That is why there is a lot of crisis for people that have this sickle, right? That have this sickle-shaped red blood cell. So when we come to our subsequent classes, whereby we'll be discussing about amino acid, we will explain in details what happens in sickle cell disease. So you have white blood cells that live for about a year, and sperm cells have a lifespan of about just 3 days. So looking at this, we can talk about the chemical component of the plasma membranes. Plasma membrane mainly consists of lipids and proteins, as you can see from the previous slide where we show the plasma membrane and the architectural or the structural components of plasma membrane. You can see you have lipids and you have proteins. So there is a wide variation in lipid and protein ratio between different cells and membrane, and this is because it is a function of the location and what is the function of that particular cell, okay, and the location. So the function performed by cell and the location determine the quantity of proteins and lipids that are present in their membrane. So if you look at this table, you have the membrane, you have the protein in percentage.